My name is Jamie Loren, and I am a menstrual cycle coach and a fertility awareness educator. And today I am going to be sharing information relating to womb wisdom and the menstrual cycle. So we have, as women, been given this very powerful center, our womb. And in this center, we have a cycle that is occurring, a natural cycle. Just like many other cycles there are in the universe. And when we sync up with our cycle, we have this coming home into our body. We feel there's an access to more pleasure, more joy, more ease, more flow. And so that's why I want to share this with you today. I will take you through a bit of the science behind what's actually happening in our cycle. And I find this helps with the why things are happening in our body. And then I will explain how these hormones are influencing us on a physical, a mental, emotional, and spiritual level. And I will be sharing some framework that's really delicious. It's something that we take from the outer world of the seasons, this natural cycle that Earth goes through of winter, spring, summer, and autumn, and how we can relate that to ourselves. I wonder first if we can ground in together and just take a moment to connect with our wombs. So if you're in a comfortable position, and go ahead and place the hands over the womb space. And start to deepen your breath. Enjoying a long, deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. One more like this. Start to deepen the breath, sending the inhale down to the womb space. Visualizing the womb expanding with the inhale. And allowing a softening with the exhale. And as you breathe with her, you can start to cultivate an inner smile. As a gesture of welcoming her. And as you rest there with her, see if you're aware of where in your cycle you are today. and how your physical energy levels are today. And your general feeling, your general outlook on life today. Let's take a deep inhale together through the nose. And release. And when you're ready, you can flitter the eyes open. So this amazing gift that we've been given as women, this menstrual cycle, sometimes referred to as a moon cycle. And the reason for that is because we are aligned with the same rhythm. It's called an infradian rhythm. And the moon will go from a phase of darkness, it will wax all the way to a full moon, and then it will wane back to a dark moon. And we go through a very similar cycle of moving through different energies, just like the moon. And historically, women were very synced to the moon. And nowadays, it's a bit hit and miss because we live mostly indoors and have the telephone devices that interfere with this rhythm. But there is a beautiful technique we can do by just spending a couple of minutes looking at the moon every night, which can sync us back up with the moon, if that's something that sounds appealing to you. So there's a lot of taboo around the menstrual cycle. It's quite a loaded topic. We have been, and when I say we, I will use the we statement a lot. I'm using a generalized statement here, and if you have a different experience, then that is, of course, your experience. But what I find is majority of women have been raised in a way where we don't really speak about our menstrual cycle. And unfortunately, we weren't educated much on this topic of what is happening in our bodies on a monthly basis. So when we don't have an awareness of our cycle and we don't have an acceptance of our cycle, we don't consciously access those gifts that sit within this cycle. And instead, not only do we not consciously receive these gifts and energies and know how to work with them to maximize our beautiful cycle that we have, we actually start to see the cycle as a burden. You know, it's like it's something that we don't want to deal with. And to some extent, we have been told it's okay, you don't have to deal with it, you can go on birth control and shut the cycle off, and then you don't need to deal with it. You might have to have a bleeding period, but you don't have to ovulate, and this will make life easier. And for sure, at some point in life it did. In the 60s when it came out, it gave so much liberation and freedom to women. And now I believe we're in a place where we have access to a lot more information around how we can monitor our own fertility naturally by ourselves. And when we do that, we have access to our our cycle and our hormones, which are so fundamental for our overall health and wellness. So I'm going to share with you a few minutes of science or biology, and I'm going to show you what's happening in a menstrual cycle. So I'm going to hold up a chart here, but for the women in the room, you can turn that piece of paper over in front of you. And for those online, you can access the PDF that's attached just below this video. So this is a typical menstrual cycle. And I say typical because this is a 28-day cycle. And if you sit outside of that, that's also okay. This is just the average. It's said that a healthy menstrual cycle is anywhere between 24 and 36 days. But for the sake of this chart, we're looking at a 28-day cycle. And you can see at the bottom of the chart, there's a number of squares, and you can see each square as a day. And then above the squares, you have a dot, a blob, growing and shrinking and changing. This is the activity in the ovaries. And then above that, we have these hormones that are fluctuating. And we have a dozen reproductive hormones. But for the sake of today, we're going to talk about 4 main reproductive hormones. Some of you may be familiar with these, and some of you may find this is all totally new information. So we have 2 which are produced in the pituitary gland. That's FSH and LH. And then we have estrogen and progesterone, which are produced down in our ovaries. And the pituitary and the ovaries are in constant communication. So what happens in a cycle? A woman is bleeding. We start at the beginning, day 1, when she's menstruating. And at this time, there is little to no activity in the ovaries. So you see that there's a small blob there. The ovaries are nice and quiet, allowing the body to simply release. And the hormones are also at a low position. The first hormone to trigger is from the pituitary. It sends FSH down to the ovaries, and that stands for follicular stimulating hormone, and it does exactly that. It stimulates a follicle in the ovary. So you start to see this follicle down here growing now. And as that follicle grows, estrogen is produced. So you start to see estrogen rising. And when estrogen gets to its highest level, its peak level, it triggers the next hormone, luteinizing hormone, which creates ovulation. That's what triggers the follicle to rupture, and that's ovulation. After ovulation has occurred, estrogen falls away, and that blob now turns into something else called a corpus luteum, and it's producing the progesterone. So you now see progesterone spikes. It doesn't spike, it surges slowly, actually. And if there was no conception, if there was no sperm that met the egg at ovulation, then progesterone will fall away. And you see we return to low hormones, and then the uterine line will shed and the woman will begin her next cycle of bleeding. So what is interesting about this is how each hormone triggers the next. Yeah. And this is why it's important for hormonal health, because each hormone is impacting and triggering the next. Now, I just want to show the women what happens if a woman is on birth control. And we're looking at this blob again, so you see the blob down the bottom there changing, and that's what's happening in a natural cycling woman. But in a woman that's on hormonal birth control, it shuts this cycle down and becomes just like that quiet period in the ovaries. And What that means is, I have a friend, I have an aunt. Why that is because there's one synthetic hormone in the birth control contraceptive methods called progestogen, and this blocks the receptor to the pituitary gland. And so if the pituitary gland receptor is blocked, then it doesn't trigger this first hormone, follicular stimulating hormone, which isn't then triggering estrogen for ovulation and progesterone. Yeah. So I share that with you because as I continue to talk about the topic of the seasonal framework, which is where I'm heading shortly, you may not resonate so deeply with this because you're actually not having that fluctuation of these natural hormones. So there may be a period of life when you have been off the birth control and therefore you would still remember and resonate. And you may resonate because you can also be influenced by the moon. So for women that are on birth control and or post-menopause, syncing up with the moon energy is a really beautiful way of still maintaining the access to this framework that I will share shortly. So as you look at that chart in front of you, you may notice something. If you look at day 2 and approximately day 10 and approximately day 17, you see how these hormones are wildly different in the body. And it may start to make sense as to why we feel different so often. And I hear many women say they feel like they're crazy or they've been told that they're crazy. And I resonate with that from the time that I didn't know about cyclical awareness. And now I really believe that we are pretty predictable beings. We just need to have an awareness of our cycle and how the hormones are influencing us, because actually we are in our cycle and repeating very similar patterns with each cycle. And so this leads me into the topic of menstrual cycle awareness, where we start to basically become very aware of where we're at in our cycle and what energy is naturally there, which is created by these hormones. First, before I go into the role of the hormones, I would love to share one more chart with you. This is also attached for those online. It doesn't matter if you can't see too well. Basically, at the top here we have our hormonal system, which is like the moon, 28 days-ish. And then below that we have the man's hormonal chart, which for those of you who can't see it is almost definitely a flat line. It's like, and ours is like, right? So the reason being is that a man's hormonal cycle is 24 hours. So they go through the same experience, let's say, every day, whereas we're going through ours over a month. So when we see that, it makes a lot of sense as to why we feel crazy or have been told we're crazy compared to them. And the gift in that is understanding how we are different, but first reflecting on the fact that we have been raised in, especially, I don't want to go how far into this, but we have been in a patriarchal society, and we are living in a very masculine society, a masculine culture. And I don't mean just masculine in man and woman, but I mean in the energies. So within us, we have the masculine energy and the feminine energy. And the masculine is this moving, dynamic, fast-paced, achieving, agenda, bright and speedy kind of And the feminine is the opposite. It's the surrender, it's the passive, it's the slowing down, it's the stillness and the darkness. And as a society, we are pushing, we are basing our worth on what we do, what we output. And it's easier, I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's definitely easier for a man that shows up the same every day than a woman who is altering. Her experience is different, let's say on the least a week-to-week basis. And so we have been encouraged to live with habits and daily routines, and that again works well for the men, but for us that can be more challenging because these hormones are not just influencing our emotions, which we are probably most aware of how they've influenced us, but they influence all of our systems. They influence our resting cortisol levels, our nervous system, our digestion, our digestive system, so it speeds up, it slows down, our metabolism, the way our brain functions. Our brain is changing by 25% over a whole cycle. Sometimes we're more reflective, sometimes we're more analytical, sometimes we're more focused on particular like planning, so everything is changing within us. So it's actually really tricky to try and do the same thing every day. And the most obvious thing in that is our yoga practice, right? And this is why it's so important to listen to our body and to honor the energies that are within us, rather than feeling like we have to show up to our mat the same every day and take the same effort and be the same amount, have the same amount of strength and resilience. So let me share with you this framework, which is called the Inner Seasons. It was developed by a woman called Alexandra Pope, and she shares this concept that I adore because I presume most of us here on Earth have experienced seasons, or the winter, spring, summer, and autumn. And some countries it's a lot more extreme, and others it can be less extreme, but we still nonetheless experience these different seasons. And how we can learn from nature, how we can learn from this cycle that is happening outside of us and adopt that inside. So we see the time of menstruation as a time of inner winter. And this period of inner winter is usually, if I'm talking about a 28-day cycle, it's usually starting a couple of days before menstruation, so it could be day 26, 27, and usually finishes around the time of a woman finishing her bleed, let's say around day 5. These are rough numbers. It's very energetic. So I find women, when they're first introduced to this topic, it can be useful to use these numbers as a gauge, but the more you become aware of your cycle and your energy, you'll figure out your own days. And then the premenstrual phase is, the pre-ovulatory phase is spring. So this can be day 6 to 11-ish, maybe 12. Then we have the ovulatory period, which is known as inner summer, usually around day 12 to 17-ish. And then we have the premenstrual phase. This is the longest phase in the cycle and is known as inner autumn. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about what we might experience in each of these seasons, and the next session we will go a deep dive into inner winter. So you will get to expand on that in the next session. So inner winter, our hormones are low. We are releasing. We're releasing the uterine lining, the blood, but it's not just a physical release. It's also an emotional release. Our womb holds a lot of emotions and information that we collect through life, but the opportunity when we bleed every cycle is to release the emotional release from that cycle that's built up throughout. And typically we start to feel a drawing in. So if you think about how you feel in winter, naturally we tend to stay indoors because it's cold outside, and we want to be cozy and under our blankets and wearing socks and a hot water bottle. And we would reach for more of those warming foods like soups and stews and broths. And it's more of a reflecting time, winter. Whenever we find stillness, we tend to reflect when we give space to that. And this is the natural gift of this phase, is finding time and space to release and reflect. It's a very nourishing time too. So when we allow ourselves to slow down, which can be so tricky, so tricky, and particularly when we haven't been encouraged to, or we still have all of our commitments that we have to do. We have to show up for things, for people. And this we'll explore a bit more tomorrow or in the next session. But it's about how we can find safety to surrender into this time of our cycle. And for sure, like anything, it's a practice. It's connecting to that Tara energy that we were connecting to this morning. Finding some compassion for ourselves. Particularly when we know we want to stop. We know we could or should. I don't like that word should, but we know we should because our body is potentially calling for it. And we find it hard to. It can feel uncomfortable. And, we don't have to experience pain to allow ourselves to be still. There's so many gifts of access of the wisdom that can flow through us during this time, that we can consciously choose to, we can want to. And that's where I love to lead women to, when they get to the place where they want to take time to bleed. It's not because they have to. They see the delightfulness that can be experienced in this time of the cycle. So that's a bit about winter. We'll pick more up on that one next session. And then spring is the next season we enter, and when we know spring is here is when we start to feel the the pull to be up and about, and there's a desire to be outside. There's a curiosity, what has been waiting. There's a beautiful innocence that rests in this phase. There's a sense of playfulness that can be tapped into. And spring, when you think about it as a season, it's fresh, it's new beginnings, there's a sense of inspiration to try new things, to go to new places. And what's happening in our body is estrogen is rising. And estrogen is this energizing hormone. It's an uplifting hormone. And it makes us feel more resilient. It makes us feel more confident. Can make us feel more confident in what we're doing and how we are feeling in our bodies. Can be easier to make decisions. And the way that estrogen impacts us in this season is the brain is very optimized for learning new things. So if you ever have a tricky task to tackle, for me that's just filling out a form online. This is the time to do it. There's a desire the brain is optimized to kind of worm into data or into the fine print of things. And we have that resilience as well. So maybe in my autumn I would feel more frustrated at the lack of things going right when I'm filling out one form, for example. But in my spring I am resilient, so I'm doing it. It's not working quite right, but it's okay. I've got the strength and resilience to keep going. So this is what I say is one of the superpowers or the gifts in the phase of inner spring. And then we have summer, inner summer, and this is the time of ovulation. And I think it's the time when we can be seen as the woman that maybe society has encouraged us to be, the superwoman, the woman that can do all the things. She's productive, she's confident, she's sexy. So when estrogen rises, it also triggers other hormones to release during this time of ovulation. And with those other hormones, including testosterone, which is the one that men, that's their main hormone that they're operating on, it gives us more of that, even more of that resilience and confidence that I spoke of, but it also awakens our libido and our sensuality. And this is obviously for a biological reason. Yeah, so our body, whether we choose to or not, wants to do the things that will help us fall pregnant. So that means that it wants us to feel sexy and confident in our bodies so that we can go and find a mate to play with. And what that shows up for most women is the gift of enjoying their body. I know personally that I had this experience, and it was such a relief when I found out it was just hormones, And I find it's the thing that gets a lot of nods when I share this in groups, is that there are times in the month we look in the mirror and we put something on from our wardrobe and we put it on and we feel amazing, and it might be our tighter dress and we're like, oh, I want to go out for drinks, and it's like feeling all confident and pretty and you enjoy what you see in the mirror. And then there's a few days before bleeding where you don't want to put anything on in that wardrobe, and for some reason you think you've put on weight. And in summer you think you've lost weight. And this is a common thing where, for sure, we get a little bit more bloated with water retention premenstrual, but it's mostly just the play of the hormones, because estrogen is this optimistic, confident boosting hormone, and when we don't have that, we see something else. So there was a lot of relief for me in accepting my body and realizing that it's pretty much always the same. It's just a hormonal game in my mind. And not to buy into that anymore. So summer is often a time when we want to do more powerful practices in yoga. It's a time when we want to be socializing with people. It's a really great time for using your voice. The gift of this season is communication. So learning, tapping into that energy of being able to use your voice and communicate to friends, family, in business. And then we have autumn. And autumn is the premenstrual phase. And for sure, as it is the longest phase, how you feel on day 18 will be very different to, not very, but it will be more different to how you feel on, let's say, day 22 and day 26. As you approach the bleeding event, there is more progesterone in the body. You'll see on your chart the rise of progesterone. And so when estrogen has fallen away and we're left with the progesterone hormone, this hormone is about relaxing and slowing down. So the beauty of everything in nature is it creates balance. And that's what the role of progesterone is now doing. It's creating balance in the body and in the systems, and not just in our physical body, but also our emotional body. So it's normal to start feeling our energies dropping as we move into inner autumn. And it's normal to start feeling a drawing in again as we approach closer to winter. This desire to slow down and spend more time in solitude, or just with less people, less social situations. And the gift of this phase is completing. There's a natural desire to finish things, to complete things. So it's actually a very productive phase. We have a desire to do a lot of things, but we don't necessarily have the stamina to do everything that we could do in summer. So it's about, this phase is a very important phase to up our self-care. And self-care can be in the form of slowing down in your yoga practice, can be in the form of taking a hot shower or a hot bath. But it's also really about understanding your needs and how to respect and honor those needs that you have, and how you can communicate these to others around you. And this phase is the most important phase to tap into this energy and this this power of saying no if it's a no, or yes if it's a yes. And in this phase, as we get closer to menstruation in a winter, there's a tension building within us. Yeah, it's like the womb is ready to release. And energetically, we are ready to release. Our nervous system is more activated, and it's more easily activated. We are more easily triggered in this phase. So this is why it's so important to really appreciate and honor the body and nourish the body and the nervous system through these practices. But one thing I love to focus on during this time and encourage women to focus on are our release techniques. So we can consciously release tension from our body. And so if we're thinking about our yoga practice, for example, doing the shaking that we were doing in the Kali practice last week, this is a beautiful practice to weave into the morning to physically release the tension in the body and energetically shaking out what we want to release. The Simha breath, beautiful for releasing any unspoken words that we feel we have to grip our tongue at this time when all we want to do is speak the truth. And there's that natural fire within us during this premenstrual phase. So I believe that we have an opportunity to consciously choose to release this energy in our sacred space, in our morning, rather than creating a scenario where we unconsciously get to release by picking an argument with a loved one, for example. This is what I tend to see happens because the energy wants to be moved. So we have the chance to do that in a healthy way for us. There's so much more I can say about the seasons, but I want to close out there and really start to see how we are moving through this pattern every cycle, and we have these ebbs and flows of physical energy levels, of resilience, of gifts that come through the way that our brain is optimized. And when we start to have an awareness of this, we can give ourselves permission to feel the way that we are feeling. Yeah, so this is one of the biggest reliefs I find women get from this menstrual cycle awareness, or this observation of how our energies are, because we have been raised to think that we should be the same every day, and it's breaking this belief or what we've been told, and starting to tap into our own unique rhythm. And when we feel crappy and we feel tired and we feel irritated, it's all totally okay. It's just about observing that and allowing that and holding and caring for that part of us. So I think we will close out there and come back to inner winter tomorrow. Thank you.